So, I don't know what you'd call it, like an insomnia attack. I had 2 or 3 days where I couldn't sleep. Then I fell asleep for 4 hours. And I woke up and I was awake for another 6. Then I got a nice 16 hours of sleep in. I shaved at some point in there, that whole space of time. Yeah, no, first day in a while when I've kind of felt sure enough to drive. Jesus fuck, man. Spent my whole life being like, man, I'm not a sucker, I'm not gonna do drugs, but I don't know why the fuck I'm not doing meth. I'm suffering all the negative effects of meth. Why don't I just do meth? Yeah, anyway, so I shoot kind of in a old-fashioned type of stance, you know, felt like that, and it's kind of weird, so I should probably take a moment to explain shooting stances. There's actually a bit of an interesting history there behind them. So first off, got windy all of a sudden. Whatever. First off, this is called a blade stance or a dueling stance, and that's because, you know, if you're like a saber fencer, you're already pretty much familiar with it, you know. Dash foot forward, turn sideways with your support foot, and on the back of your hip, or on the small of your back, then blade hand out. So this way, you're presenting as small of a target as possible, and you also have a lot of control with your kind of tripod type setup, you know, forward, back, side to side. And for a long time, this was the correct way to, you know, to shoot a pistol, because pistol shooting, for one, pistol shooting evolved from dueling. For two, you know, you and your opponent have your single shot pistols, so both line up, make yourself a small target, so less likely your opponent's going to hit you. You take your time, line it up, and it's a road there, so I'm not going to shoot, but you take your time, you line up, you make sure you're going to make your shot count. No, it's why it's the right way to shoot. Then the second, so that was true up until revolvers started you know, to come around, or I suppose maybe flintlock pistols, because then what you got was like the target stance, which is, you know, it's not the blade stance. A lot of people refer to that as a target stance. It's not. Your target stance is, you know, lock your arm, lock your stomach, and do that. Looks fucking weird, right? Your arm's kind of like a weird mutant cobra. And the reason for that is you still have your good footwork, but you're also like you're locking your body in place so you don't sway around as much. Then you're putting your sights closer to your face so you can, better see them. Recoil control doesn't matter because remember, you're still target shooting, so you're firing really, really slow. So good sight picture, recoil control doesn't matter. Not the, it wasn't the correct way to shoot though. The correct way was still blade stance because a shooting stance was obviously impractical. You can't control recoil like that. It's just a bit silly. So it was kind of the way of the world. At the same time, there was a bit of an interesting development with pistol sights. So, originally black powder firearms, pretty short range, just as a practical matter, because your ignition system was a match, like a slow burning match. You load your firearm, then you have a little, like a kicker charge, like a slow match of powder out the side of the chamber. Then you apply your ignition system, be that a slow match or a wheel lock or a flint lock, to create a spark, and that slowly burns down the powder. And that gives you time to be less, to introduce some wandering. Even more so with the flintlock, because then you don't just have a significant delay between pulling the trigger and the shooty going bang. You also have this big giant spring just like slamming something down, and then you have that big delay. So you make your good target stance, hold, boom. It's a little bit of a thing. So effective range was practically pretty limited. So bigger sights weren't really a big deal. You could have small sights, and another thing was, if you had a pistol, you were probably some sort of aristocrat. So you were handed a pistol at like 6 or 7 years old, and from then on you were target shooting every day of your life. So the small sights would just be second nature to you. Different for long arms, because those were only really effective in a battle when you were firing in a mass formation at another mass formation, so all you needed was a front bead. But yeah, for pistols, that was kind of the way of the world for a long time. Like if you look at pictures of old pistols, and I'm not going to bother to put pictures up on screen because I don't really give a shit, and no one will watch this anyway. But you'll notice that pistol sights before and during World War I, they were absolutely tiny. It's because, again, if you, not quite as much in the U.S., but still quite a bit in the U.S. Because in the U.S. we actually used for pistols. So, if you complained about the size of your pistol sights, then what you were actually complaining about was not having enough practice to, get good with your pistol sights, because, battles were still mostly taking place in daylight hours in the civilized parts of the world. Anywhere else, if somebody's mugging you, right, or you're being attacked by a wild dog, or you have like a gang of bandits coming up on your farmhouse in like the plains of nowhere, then you're gonna be shooting at someone who's like yay far away. So in that case, what you have is, oh God, So realistically, in most non-warfare contexts, you're not going to be using the sights on your pistol. You know, it's going to be guys right here. You know, so kind of, and it's going to be accurate enough. You're not going to look down the sights anyways. And in warfare, you know, again, like these aristocratic officers who, you know, who were practically born with a target pistol in their hand, you know, thinking like colonial troops or the U.S. Marines, people who were getting sent to a jungle somewhere to fight people with spears. These people were not only, you know, experienced target shooters as a prerequisite for becoming an officer, they were also volunteers, so the best of the best and the most, you know, gung-ho. So these small sights were very easy for them to use. You know, like if you tell like a British officer in like 1890, hey, these pistol sights are too small, he'd say, oh, what do you mean? Or, yeah, I can't do a British accent, but like, oh, what do you mean? You know, I've been using pistol sights like this since I was, you know, 6 years old, and well, just the other day I shot a fuzzy wuzzy in, you know, in his eye socket from 300 meters off while he was inside that tree line at dusk, and you know, by George, if these sights were even smaller, then I tell you what, I could like pick out individual arteries and people I was shooting at, because I've been, you know, in Africa doing this shit for like 15, 20 years after my extensive history of target shooting. You know, like pretty much the same the world over. If you have a pistol, it's probably because, well, then you've probably been handed it after becoming extremely familiar with these target sights. And again, you're used to like really slow fire. Double action revolvers are a pretty new thing. So recoil control, not really a thing. Picking up a target and putting the sights on them, not really a problem. Because if you are issued a pistol as your primary weapon, you know, it's like an extension of your limb at that point, you know, by the time you're even issued a pistol. Two, you know, if that's not you, and you're like some office clerk somewhere, then if you ever have to use your pistol, it's again going to be at type ranges. So two things happened during World War I. First off, large conscript forces of men who weren't necessarily very familiar with using handguns were issued handguns. They were given like one trip to the range to, you know, learn. And secondly, in World War I, you got these massive battles and these constant skirmishes happening at dusk, at dawn, and at night. You know, it's like, so you're using these little teeny tiny sights to try and pick up someone who's in a gray coat or like a khaki coat, you know, against this dark muddy background while it's dark out, with no light source but God kerosene lantern, you know. So after World War I, there was a bit of an, you know, an impetus for sights to get a little bit bigger, easier to read. That started to happen by the 1920s. I suppose the third thing is double actions and semi-automatic, double action revolvers and semi-automatic handguns were at that point common, and in common issue and in common use. So recoil control started to become more of a thing. So by the mid to late 1920s, what you started to see was, you know, this is still the correct way to shoot, but you started to see people cheating. Just to say, so like this, you have everything is just in one arm, and that, you know, I can kind of wander a bit especially if you get tired, like if you're holding this for a long time, if you've been like doing actual work, and even if not, even if you're like target shooting, uh, two hands are inherently more stable because any wiggling in this hand is counteracted by the wiggling in this hand, so sort of that type of thing. So you started to see people cheating by, squaring off to the target, so both feet parallel, shoulder width apart, so that way you still have some front and back and some side to side. Then do that. And what that means is a lot more stable and you have better recoil control. So let me throw in. So So, your blade type saber tooling stance is kind of sure. Your cheating stance is kind of it's much easier to hold the gun steady, or if you're a weakling like me, it's much easier to get back on target. It's important to note this was kind of an this was more of an American invention, specifically the predecessors of IPSC, of American competition pistol shooting. European pistol shooting it's a completely different animal. It's after World War I, especially when all the like military type aristocratic families have been practically wiped out. It was like a bunch of fat inbreds who would like pick up a single shot 22 short target pistol with like a weird grip and like some movable barrel weights and some giant weird like Rube Goldberg looking iron sight system they'd put on their shooting glasses that blocked off the one eye so that they could keep a better target, like a better sight on target, and they'd be like, then they'd take one shot and they'd put the gun down, and they'd wander off to go like have a yuck about the hilarious noises their serving staff make when they like beat them with a fire stick poker while blind drunk at 2 p.m. on a Thursday, and they'd wander back and they'd pick up the gun a second time, and then they'd put it down, they'd walk away, they'd like go through a tumbler of brandy and share investing tips, and they'd wander back and then they'd put it down, they'd wander off and like go watch horses breathe, and then they'd wander back, and and in the U.S. we had like almost a more practical approach to competition pistol shooting, which with the introduction of these faster methods of firing focused on putting as many shots on on target as possible in as short of a time as possible with a handgun which would not which isn't specifically a target handgun, or not almost a duty type handgun. Not actually a duty type handgun, because the sight still sucked, and everyone was just okay with that because that's just how it was. But something more like a duty type handgun. So that's when you started to see that supported, like your cheating grip. That actually didn't come out of nowhere. Believe it or not, women used to do target shooting as well, like even in like the Georgian and Edwardian eras. And just as a simple matter of fact, women have weaker, weaker shoulders and weaker wrists than men, so they will tire out doing this long before most men will. Me, perhaps not included, because yeah. So what you saw a lot of women doing like the before times was something more like this, which is called like the teacup grip. All you're doing there is you're supporting your handgun, and your supported grip kind of evolved from that, sort of. And World War II happened, and pistol sights got a little bit bigger, and post World War II, the United States got really into IPSC, which was like the standardized successor to that more realistic type of combat shooting, almost combat shooting, competition. And in the 70s, some guy in IPSC, he figured, well, if you're shooting a rifle, what you do is you put the rifle into your shoulder, you hold it back, you wrap your arm in the sling, and then you hold the forend of the rifle. You kind of put tension on it so you have force going both ways, so your rifle is less likely to wander. So how do we do that with pistols? And like, if we did that with pistols, surely that would make it more accurate, kind of like doing that with a rifle makes it more accurate. So you can't pull this back and to the side because it's a pistol. I mean, long story short, what he figured out was take your target stance that worked, which is your cheating stance. Stand kind of sight on to the target a bit. So you make kind of like an isosceles here. So, and you push with your firing hand, you pull with your support hand, and that kind of gets you the same effect. It really makes the pistol a lot more stable and significantly more controllable under recoil. Probably shouldn't take these out. So from like the late 70s when that was invented, and well, it became popular almost immediately. I think it was like 70 something, late 70s that whoever it was like Weaver or somebody figured that out. Yeah, that became popular almost immediately. And that kind of remained the American shooting meta for a long time. What's really interesting is we've started to go back to like the squared on support stance with, like this. And we're seeing that for two reasons, and one of them is body armor. I don't usually wear body armor. In fact, I don't even own body armor right now. So doing this just kind of makes me a bigger target, and I'm not a good enough of a shot to get any benefit out of it anyway. So I do still do that. But you're also seeing a switch back to it for another reason, which is American competition shooting has moved forward again. it's IPSC slowly kind of became the European standard of inbred morons picking up a impractical target pistol, firing once, putting it down, then going away again. And kind of the generation prior to me kind of moved things back towards the realistic. And they've done that by adding movement and adding movement and changes of position to it. So instead of lining up at a target bay, taking all of your shots from your best unsupported stance, as in like holding the gun with your own body weight, not like setting it on top of something. Instead of that, modern American pistol shooting is kind of more, you know, here's a course, here are your targets, start here, go here, go here, go here, and here are a bunch of weird things that you have to do, and it looks silly, and it is silly, but it's also trying to induce stress, you know, make your arms more tired and wobbly, introduce different shooting positions so you can't just be really good at firing from the one position, then just do that. And then we've had a whole bunch of new technological advancements too, like, and for one, we've had the whole bore axis thing, bringing the bore axis of the pistol down near to your hand, so instead of like chamber up your hand here, when the gun fires, it flips the recoil. More modern handguns have like they want you to hold them kind of like this. The trigger's further down, and the barrel is kind of more in line with your hand. So when you fire, the recoil just pushes back, takes your sights off target less. We've also had a move towards smaller calibers, obviously, you know, like starting in like this 70s, I guess, when the U.S. started to see Wonder 9s. I mean, we had, like, the Browning high power existed in 1935. I don't know why everyone didn't just switch to that, because it was obviously better. A lot of old people will try to talk to you about, like, oh man, 45 is so powerful, like, you can kill God, bro. No, you can't. Like, the weirder thing is a lot of people, like, try to bring up the Thompson-Lagarde tests to, like, prove that 45 is superior to 9mm, but like the Thompson-Lagarde test says exactly the opposite. Like, if you actually read the test data and like the write-up, the testing committee like explicitly states there is no difference in performance between like 38 Smith & Wesson, 45 long Colt, 9x19, 9x20. They're all exactly the same in practical terms and, you know, in performance. They recommended a new handgun cartridge based off of 45 long Colt, like 45 ACP, explicitly because there is no difference between them, because they all penetrate about the same distance, and that's what actually kills people. The reason they recommended 45 instead of 9mm is because 45 is better, like, because cavalry wanted a pistol that they could use to euthanize wounded horses, and 45 was the one that could most easily shatter the front of a horse's skull from like 7 paces. So they just said, well, let's just go with that because we already have it, and it's better at this one specific thing, and exactly the same as everything else in every other way. But as soon as you got double stack magazines, 45 is fatter. It gives you a massive disadvantage in terms of capacity. And this isn't anything related to shooting stances, but we've also had red dots recently, like pistol red dots. They've gotten small enough to put on a handgun, and they've gotten, you know, they're figured out to where they're fairly durable now. They won't be like vibrated to death on the top of the handgun slide. It's actually fine story. I still can't use a red dot. the like iron sights just make sense, right? You're taking the thing and the thing, you're lining the things up, and you're putting the things over the third thing that you want to shoot at. And that tells you where the bullet is actually going to go, and that it's going to go where you're trying to make it go, right? And that makes sense, and you know, it's fine. Even with my like fucked eyesight, I can get by with that. But the first time I was handed a red dot, I was kind of like, oh. What the fuck? There's always a little red dot in the middle of that, man. Shit. How do I tell if that's pointed the right direction? It's like, all right, let's shoulder that. Oh, okay. Is this where I had my head when I zeroed? More like this? No, more like... No, you're overthinking it. Just, you know, put your head back where you had it when you first shouldered the... That's not where you had your... No, that's not right either. It's like... it doesn't matter where you put your head on the thing. There's always a little red dot, and it's kind of fucked with my head. And, so I... Obviously not a smart man here. I ended up using the red dot as like a really shitty ersatz rear sight to qualify with. Unsurprisingly did terribly. I always just figured I'd like get a modern rifle with a red dot, and I'd just practice on range until I just figured it out. And it's been 5 or 6 years and I haven't been able to make that happen yet. So I guess I won't be able to. So modern pistol shooting, for a variety of reasons, is kind of coalesced around the much more flexible and making better use of body armor type stance, which is like this old-fashioned supported stance. It's kind of weird how that's worked out, but again, no body armor, so that's why I use like the saber stance or the weaver stance, because you know I don't have body armor. You know. Yeah. So that's the answer to that question.